Hi, my name is Julene Allen, founder of Women for Action, a 501c3 organization which aims to tell stories about the under-recognized contributions of women innovators. You're listening to Straight Talk, No Chaser, where you can tune into independent reporting and genuine conversations. This show also funnels stories from collaborative programs such as the Lean In Ohio 100 Women Interview Series. In her recent interview, Oprah stated that all authors and creators are at the center of their work and that there is something in us which leads to our innovations. What was at the center for you which led to create the BlackBoard African-American bestseller list?
Well, I had written a 420-page novel and sent it to New York, several different agents, literary agents, to seek their representation. Mm-hmm. And it was returned to me again and again until I began to think that it was my lack of creativity as opposed to me being rejected due to the industry. And then what happened was I sent it to a major agent, and she sent it back. And when I received it, I picked up the phone and called her. And fortunately for me, she answered, which I never thought that she would actually pick up the phone. Mm-hmm. And when she answered, we had a discussion, and she said that she hated to tell me this, but they did not see an economic market for my work. It wasn't about me being creative or about my ability at all. It just there was no market for African-American literature, and therefore there was no market for her to sell it to, because we basically did not read and we didn't write books as African-American people.
Interesting.
I was absolutely stunned.
Do you mind? Go ahead.
Sorry. I was absolutely stunned and said, you mean the general industry doesn't believe that we read and we write books? She's like, that's right. I said, so there's no one to sell my work to if I did. And she said, no. I said, well, what about Alice Walker? Because, I knew that The Color Purple had been a big hit. She said, that was just a fluke. That would never happen again.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So do you mind sharing with me what was the details of the book?
Oh, I wrote a book about that was based on the coal mines in West Virginia back in the 1930s. My father was a coal miner, and my mother and he left the West Virginia coal mines before I was born. But three of my brothers and sisters were actually born there. And so I wanted to write a book about what it was like to be a black coal miner. And then after I did research, I decided that I would situate the book during the era of the major strikes led by John Lewis. So once I wrote the book, I really thought that, there was I let friends read it, and friends told me that they thought the book was wonderful.
Wow. So what other sort of literature do you feel the black community needs or is lacking?
Well, the thing is that it's all literature that's being written today. It was written by another ethnic group or another group, then we could write it also. I think the perceived notion that we can't write anything anybody else can is absolutely wrong, and we still fight that to this day. There's been episodic periods of the disappearance of black literature throughout history. If you look back at the slave narratives, those were the first books that were really published. And so after slavery was actually over, if you want to say it's over, then we didn't have any books published again until, like, say, the Harlem Renaissance. Mm-hmm. And then after the Harlem Renaissance was over, then once again we had disappeared. So then, the episodic renaissance of books continued. There was no consistent publishing of our work. Mm-hmm. Once the Harlem Renaissance ended, then once again we disappeared as writers. And then it didn't start again until the early civil rights movement with, Black Boy and those types of books about civil rights. And this was in the 1940s. So that, we went from Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston and that group of writers to a disappearance. And then the next thing, it's James Baldwin and Richard Wright and those writers. So then once that period ended, because you see there was never any continuity, once that period ended, then it was back to disappearing, and once again, it reappeared in the 1960s. So we went from the 40s to episode of Black writing, and then we went to the 60s, and then in the 60s we had a lot of the hip books, Iceberg Slim, Donald Goines, these writers, and we also had a great nonfiction work like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. Alex Haley wrote the autobiography of Malcolm X. That was a big book back then, and so we had a great period of Renaissance in the 60s. But once again, it didn't last, and so we then jumped forward to basically Alice Walker and The Color Purple in those books. But that wasn't the big. That was Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, and Alex Haley. Mm-hmm. That's what it was. And so after that was over, I didn't really see anything else. So I submitted my book as a work to be published, and when I didn't get picked up by anybody, and she told me the agent told me that we just didn't get published, and there was no economic viability to our work. I started researching. So I went to the public library, and this was like in the early 1990s, and we were still using microfilm. We didn't, we still weren't using computers. So in the early 1990s, I started just researching everything I could, and I consistently saw that the New York Times would surface as the way to get published, mm-hmm. or the way to be successful. If you wanted to be successful, you had to appear in the New York Times. I was like, okay,
yeah.
What other source of success is there? And the other source of success I saw was Terry McMillan. I kept seeing her name pop up everywhere. I would see Terry McMillan's name pop up as a source of that literature of that day. And I would, of course, see the last episode of Writers published, like Maya Angelou, Alex Walker, Alice Walker, Alex Haley, rather, and so forth and so on. So we would jump back and forth from the 60s to, Terry McMillan as being the hip writer of today in the early 1990s. So eventually I decided that there are two things that had to happen. We had to have a series of books that were like Terry McMillan's, and we had to have a bestseller system that represented us so that we could have a place, so we could have a buying guide for our work. So once I saw that we needed a buying guide, I thought to myself, well, I can't create or make the New York Times publish Black works. That's something that they do based on their own methodology. Mm-hmm. And I knew I couldn't influence their methodology. It was what it was, and it wasn't us. Mm. And so then, I also found that Barnes & Noble was a source for their for what they charted to see what was being published. And Barnes & Noble wasn't publishing African-American writers to any degree either. So how can we use their methodology? So what happened was I decided, okay, let me write Terry McMillan a letter, and let me create a bestseller list that would represent us with our own methodology. So the first thing I did was I started to look for bookstores or booksellers that would actually chart the books for me. And I got a lot of no's. Most booksellers are saying, "Oh no, I can't do that. I've got so much work as a bookseller. I read so much. I can't assume that responsibility for you." But then I got some yeses. So I got about 35 yeses from booksellers and said, "Okay, I'll do it for you." So once the booksellers decided they would do it for me, I said, "Okay, here I go." So then I was able to create a methodology all my own.
Mm. So just to stop you for a second, chart the books for you. What do you mean exactly? Can you explain that?
Well, what I mean is that they were willing to, count what they sold in a way of African American literature and nonfiction,
okay,
and give me the data.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could get a hold of the data, I knew that I could create my own list, and I didn't have to worry about the New York Times. They would no longer be the source of relevancy for me, or for Black writers. So most of the booksellers were African American sellers, but there were a few regional Barnes and Noble booksellers as an independent franchise. And there were also some independent bookstores. So I had a source of independent booksellers, chart stores that basically charted African American works across the board, be it independent or Barnes & Noble franchises. The total of 35 booksellers in all.
Mm-hmm.
So having assessed the data from these 35 booksellers, I had a bestsellers list that I could actually find credible in terms of me having a methodology that was safe and that was honest. Because honesty was is very powerful when you come to charting stuff and creating lists or awards.
Yeah. So your platform endeavors to increase the visibility, production, and sales of Black authors and their literature. What sort of steps would you advise a budding book author?
Well, first and foremost, I think that we have to look at it as an industry example altogether. We have to fight to stop the episodic publishing of Black literature. Without consistency, we have nothing. We start and stop. We start and stop, and it's never ceased to happen. Right today, if I want to tell Black writers what to do, I'd have to say, publish your own work. I mean, that's bad, but in the same sense, it gets it out there. There was a time when I would say that you don't have to spend money to be published. If you're being published, somebody really wants you, so you don't publish on your own. But that's different with the age of computers and self-publishing and the Amazons of the world. Mm-hmm. And it's not the same. You could publish your own work, and as an African American writer today, until the episodic silence has been stopped, what else choice do they have with the published own work? They either publish it themselves or they remain silent. They remain unseen and unheard.
Yeah.
So right now, I'm saying, although I'm sorry to have to recommend this because I think that Black writers deserve every chance to be published by publishers as anyone else. But right at the moment, I'd have to recommend that they, seek a method of publishing their own work and do that until we have another system of getting published that would require, use a mainstream channel to get published as such.
So Black writers are delving into other genres such as sci-fi, gaming, and fantasy. Would you say that there is a healthy following and consumership for Black author New Age literature? And does this expand the output for Black literature?
Well, we've had, some sci-fi, we've had some, everything you've mentioned, we've had some, representation of that. We've published sci-fi, gaming books, we've published, across the board, everything that everybody else has published.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that it doesn't sustain itself. If it doesn't sustain itself, then it disappears like everything else. So it's not that we haven't published it, but without sustainability, once again, it disappears. So the episodic publishing is not one body of work. It's across the board, everything that we write. If you're not publishing books about African Americans, there's no discrimination on what you're not publishing. It's just not there.
Mm.
And when you look at the fact that we've disappeared from the publishing landscape again and again and again, at some point we have to fight to have a sustainability throughout, across a board of creativity. So it's not that we are creative as other writers, so we don't write this, we don't write that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we write everything that white writers write, or mainstream writers. Everything mainstream writers write, we also write. Our creativity is not stymied by a certain genre. We do everything everybody else does. But what we lack is a lack of sustainability and a lack of money in the marketplace that's assigned to us, so to speak. In other words, if the publisher has an assignment of what they're going to publish for that publishing season, say let's look at spring-fall releases, which would be coming up here soon. Mm-hmm. So they have a market for spring-fall releases that they assign for this not assigned to us as a market for books by African Americans, then it's not.
Yeah.
There's no place. Where are we going to go? So that's what I'm saying. That why I hate to recommend self-publishing. I have to, because there's no assignment for us as a group or a body for books by African Americans, and so therefore there's no sustainability. So we have no choice in some ways but to try to self-publish, because the mainstream market is not representing us and they're not sustaining us.
Interesting. So, Faye, according to an article in NPR, fewer than 10% of children's books released in 2015 had a Black person as the main character. According to a yearly analysis by the Cooperative Children's Book Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and while the number of children's books about minorities has increased in the past 20 years, many classroom libraries have older books. Last fall, 11-year-old Marley Diaz decided to do something about it. She set a goal of collecting 1,000 books about Black girls by the beginning of February, and hashtag 1,000 Black Girl Books was born. She has far exceeded her goal with almost 4,000 books and counting. Now she wants to set up a Black Girl Book Club and pressures school districts to change which books are assigned to students. This initiative inspired many people, which led to her support. Would you say that the lack of people of color in adult literature stems from the lack of authorship and visibility of people of color in children's books?
Well, of course, we want to say that, there's a path to publishing. And it would be wonderful if the path to publishing was first starting with children's literature and progressing to adult literature. But just like adult literature, children's literature comes and goes. And it is based on color, unfortunately. You find thousands and thousands. So, I commend her, absolutely commend her. And we want to see more girls like her. And by large, we want to see across the spectrum writers and readers attempt to do what she attempted to do. As I said, that it's absolutely wonderful. But once again, whatever she does has to be sustained in the marketplace by others like her. By as we go up the spectrum, we say, but we also have to do the same thing as we go up the spectrum. We have to do it for children's books, teen books, and adult literature. But we can't say right now that adult literature will be published because of because of the number of children's books that are being published. That certainly has not happened so far. So once again, until we are sustained in the marketplace, we're not going to see this happen. This is not to take anything away from what she's done at all. But, the BlackBoard list, probably all books from 1990 and up until 2005, we had books on the BlackBoard list. That is thousands and thousands and thousands of books. In fact, the Book Industry Study Group report of 2000-2001, which is a report done based on industry sales by the Book Industry Study Group, determined that over the last 10 years, they did a study from 1990 to 2001. For 10 years, they wanted to see how the BlackBoard list impacted the book industry across the board. And they determined that $2.5 billion was made in books based on the creation of the BlackBoard list, and books that it created a springboard for. So more authors appeared on the New York Times than appeared on the BlackBoard list. The authors on the BlackBoard list were represented. The list was in Essence magazine for nearly 10 years. There was millions of readers who saw the BlackBoard list year after year after year. But yet, the list was not able to sustain itself, and the list was eventually pulled from the magazine, and then Essence itself experienced a drop in their subscribership. So it wasn't sustained either. So I commend the young lady for everything that she's done. it won't sustain itself if we don't have an overall group of people that work to make it so. So it can't be just one person or one child. It has to be us as a group of African Americans that fight for our rights to be published in mainstream houses and self-published across the board.
So tell me about Bitty Blurb. What is the mission and vision for this project and the program Am I My Sister's Keeper?
Well, first of all, when the list was, I saw the list was not going to sustain itself the way I hoped that it would because of the computer self-publishing boom, and Amazon had a lot to do with it. And I had watched Amazon be created at around 1994, 1995, and had been very aware of Amazon and what they were doing in terms of online publishing and book sales. So I sought to create a channel for three mediums. That would be books, music, and film. And so I created Bitty Blurb as a three-tiered medium that would represent those three genres: books, music, and film. And so that's exactly why we created it. We created it so that it would, we could represent millions of people, not thousands, every day, and not, we would have, there would be no limit as to what we could represent. In other words, we could represent 10,000 or 10 million readers. We wanted to achieve that, and we're still working towards that end.
So
I want to say too that we have to embrace the technology age just like everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to admit, going audio for some of my books. I know that's awful. There's nothing like a good hardback, but I have to admit that a couple of my recent books have been by audio.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, if we don't change with the industry, then we'll be represented less than we are today. And that's why I'm saying that I had to create Bitty Blurb as an online source for books and music and film because that's the way the trend is going. Yeah. We have to bend with the trend.
Right.
We don't have a choice. If we don't bend with them, then in fact we'll be left behind too.
You can subscribe to my weekly podcast at straighttalk.womenforaction.org and never miss a Straight Talk interview. Tune into Straight Talk, No Chaser.